In one of the most controversial infrastructure projects of the British road network, the M4 bus lane was developed as a means of reducing emissions and congestion on one of the busiest stretches of motorway in the UK, while also intending to alleviate a major accident hotspot caused by the limitations of the M4 carriageway as it enters Western London. However, what resulted was a project that caused widespread division and debate as to the ability of Tony Blair's Labour government in implementing effective upgrades to the British motorway network, with some hailing the bus lane as a statement of intent for the reduction of car dominance, while others saw it as a needless and out-of-touch reduction to the capacity of a motorway already overburdened by congestion. The M4 motorway, now a major arterial route connecting London to South Wales, was originally conceived as early as the 1930s, during a period when increasing car ownership and the need for modern high-capacity roads began to shape national transport policy in Britain, though it wouldn't be until after World War II that plans for the M4 began to materialise in earnest, as part of a broader effort by the Ministry of Transport to modernise the country's road infrastructure. This initiative gathered momentum in the 1950s, with formal announcements of large-scale motorway construction projects coming in 1956, and the M4 was intended to provide a continuous high-speed link between the capital and the industrial and commercial centres of South Wales, improving the movement of goods and people along this corridor and reducing reliance on the older and often congested A4 and A48 roads. Construction of the motorway began with the opening of the Maidenhead bypass in 1961, which formed the initial western section between junctions 7 and 9, this being followed by further segments from Slough to Maidenhead in 1963, and then the eastern section from junction 1 in Chiswick to junction 5 near Langley, which opened on March 24, 1965. This section including the Chiswick flyover, an elevated dual carriageway originally opened in 1959 that was later integrated into the motorway. Subsequent years saw the gradual westward extension of the motorway, with significant progress made throughout the late 1960s, with the stretch from junction 18 near Bath to the eastern outskirts of Newport in South Wales, incorporating the original Severn Bridge crossing as opened in 1966, while by the end of 1971, the English section of the M4 was largely complete, culminating in the opening of the 50-mile stretch between junctions 9 and 15 or Maidenhead to Swindon. Over the next decade, attention shifted to completing the motorway in Wales, with this route being particularly challenging as it involved a number of bypass schemes to navigate both urban and rugged landscape, with the Port Talbot bypass, for example, having originally opened in the 1960s as the A48M, a motorway in all but name, and was later absorbed into the M4. Other sections followed during the 1970s as the motorway pushed westward towards Swansea. But despite significant progress, one crucial non-motorway gap remained at the Briton Ferry crossing, which was a major bottleneck of the route, and was finally addressed in 1993 with the opening of a new motorway standard bridge, allowing for an uninterrupted motorway link through to Carmarthenshire. A significant milestone in the history of the M4 came in 1996 with the opening of the second Severn crossing, a major civil engineering project designed to alleviate congestion and provide a more reliable route across the Severn estuary. And with this new bridge in place, the M4 was rerouted along the new crossing, while the original Severn Bridge and its connecting motorway segment were redesignated as the M48. This reconfiguration marked the culmination of decades of planning and construction, establishing the M4 as a primary east-west motorway in southern Britain, stretching from the outskirts of London to the west of Swansea, and becoming a critical component not only of domestic road transport, but also the broader economic link between England and Wales, serving commuters, freight traffic and long-distance travellers alike. However, come the end of the 1990s, the M4, especially at its eastern end towards London and around Heathrow Airport, was showing its limitations in the face of chronic congestion, particularly during peak hours, with the transition from 3 lanes to 2 at the elevated section near Brentford, creating a significant bottleneck, with vehicles frequently required to merge in a short space, with this constant merging, coupled with erratic lane-changing behaviour, being known to worsen the overall flow of traffic, reduce vehicle speeds, and increase the likelihood of collisions. Therefore, rather than attempt a costly physical widening of the road, or rely solely on reactive measures like traffic enforcement, the government's approach was to actively manage the flow of traffic using an innovative engineering solution, with this coming to pass in the form of the M4 bus lane. The concept of implementing bus-only sections on multi-lane highways was not a new one by 1999, with the Shirley Highway Busway in Northern Virginia, now part of Interstate 395, opening in 1969 as a bus-only lane and later became a high-occupancy vehicle or HOV facility, while similarly, Los Angeles began operating exclusive bus lanes on parts of its freeway system in the 1970s, particularly along the El Monte Busway on the I-10 freeway, which opened in 1973 and was considered one of the earliest true bus rapid transit corridors in North America. As for Europe, dedicated bus lanes were more often found on urban expressways and ring roads rather than on true motorways, with some examples being in the Netherlands, where separate busways were implemented in the Randstad region from the 1980s onwards, with priority given to buses along key multi-lane roadways, while Germany and France also experimented with bus priority measures on major roads, though most were short stretches within urban areas rather than extended motorway corridors. As for the creation of the M4 bus lane, this was, in effect, a controlled lane drop or an intentional reduction in general traffic lanes that was designed to smooth the merging process further upstream by standardizing the road layout to 2 lanes for general traffic, which would theoretically reduce abrupt lane switching and smooth vehicle movements as drivers adjusted earlier to the lane reduction. The scheme itself involved the conversion of the offside lane or the third lane on the eastbound carriageway into a dedicated priority lane restricted to certain vehicle categories, which included buses, coaches, motorcycles, emergency service vehicles, and licensed black cabs. This bus lane spanning a 3.5-mile stretch between Junction 3 near the A312 at Cranford and Junction 2 at Brentford, just before the M4 transitioned into the elevated dual-lane section leading into central London, while crucially, there was no intermediate access points along this stretch, and traffic flowing into the city could not exit or enter during that segment. More importantly, the purpose of the bus lane was not to punish car users or to restrict road access arbitrarily, and was instead devised to maximize the efficiency of a finite stretch of road by reducing friction points and prioritizing high occupancy and essential vehicles, with the allowance of public transport to bypass traffic queues, also aimed to increase the reliability and attractiveness of bus and coach travel, potentially encouraging modal shift from private cars to public transport, thus contributing to reduced emissions, lower fuel consumption, and improved air quality. The M4 bus lane was officially introduced in June 1999 by John Prescott, who was then serving as Deputy Prime Minister under Tony Blair's Labour government, with the official rationale for this reconfiguration being that it would reduce disruptive lane changes, smooth the flow of traffic, and provide faster, more reliable access for high-occupancy vehicles such as coaches and buses. Nevertheless, the lane rapidly became a source of public controversy and political division, with many motorists, especially those commuting daily into London, being infuriated by the perception of an underused third lane sitting empty beside stationary or slow-moving traffic, with this frustration being compounded by the visual symbolism of drivers caught in the congestion, seeing, in plain view, a sparsely populated lane reserved for a minority of road users. For those unable to use the lane, it appeared not as a clever piece of traffic management, but as an unfair restriction on their right to use the full capacity of the road, with this perception being further heightened when shortly after the lane's opening, a government motorcade carrying Prime Minister Tony Blair was spotted using the bus lane in breach of the rules, and though officials cited security concerns, the incident was seized upon by the press and opponents of the scheme as an example of hypocrisy and preferential treatment. From the outset, the M4 bus lane drew sustained criticism from high-profile media figures and motoring advocates, with Jeremy Clarkson repeatedly mocking the lane on national television, framing it as emblematic of a government out of touch with ordinary drivers, while critics accused the Labour government of waging a war on the motorist, alleging that the bus lane was an ideologically driven restriction aimed at punishing car users rather than improving road efficiency. Organisations such as the AA and RAC questioned its utility, suggesting that it had failed to produce a significant modal shift from cars to public transport, arguing that any management or environmental benefit was irrelevant if motorists did not see buses in the lane with sufficient frequency to justify their exclusion. The most visual critique of the bus lane came from the fact that its positioning on the outside lane meant that intermediate request stops could not be presented for potential commuters into the city, as per the likes of express buses using the Autopista network on the island of Tenerife, while at its peak, the M4 bus lane only ever hosted 50 buses per hour running along its course, representing less than 1 bus per minute. Independent assessments conducted by the Transport Research Laboratory in the early 2000s offered a more nuanced picture, with these studies finding that the lane did deliver tangible benefits in certain respects, as during peak periods, journey times for buses improved by up to 3.5 minutes, and even cars saw modest reductions in travel time of around 1 minute. Moreover, the reconfiguration led to a measurable drop in fuel consumption and carbon emissions by up to 16%, while the lane also helped to reduce accidents by minimising last-minute lane changes near the critical merging point at Brentford. Regardless, by the mid-2000s, the M4 bus lane had been branded Prescott's Folly by opponents, though transport professionals and some advocacy groups continued to defend the scheme as an intelligent, evidence-based solution to a very specific infrastructural problem, with their view being that the lane's significance extended beyond mere journey times and demonstrated a willingness by the government to consider road space as a shared civic resource rather than a default right for private vehicles. Nevertheless, in October 2010, just months after taking office as Transport Secretary in the newly formed Conservative-led coalition government, Philip Hammond announced that the M4 bus lane would be suspended, with this decision being framed as part of a broader effort to reverse what the government characterised as anti-motorist policies introduced under Labour. Hammond described the bus lane as an emblematic failure and as a symbolic gesture that had delivered little practical value, pledging that from December 24, 2010, the lane would be open to all vehicles for an 18-month trial, during which its impact would be assessed, though in practice, the dismantling began even earlier, with the first section of the lane being decommissioned overnight on November 16. Temporary signage was replaced, road markings were reconfigured, and by the end of December the entire length of the lane had reverted to general-purpose use, though an exception was to be made for the London 2012 Olympics, when the lane would be reinstated as part of the Olympic route network to guarantee smooth travel for athletes, officials and media representatives. But once the Games had concluded, the government indicated that the lane would be permanently abolished. This decision provoked a strong response from environmental campaigners, transport planners, and advocates of public transport, with Friends of the Earth voicing concerns that opening the lane to general traffic would worsen air quality, particularly in residential areas near the motorway, by increasing vehicle emissions, while the Campaign for Better Transport denounced the move as short-sighted and politically motivated, arguing that it amounted to little more than a symbolic concession to motoring lobbyists. These groups maintained that the real problem had never been the lane itself, but the bottleneck at Brentford, though this was an intractable issue given the physical constraints of the elevated road section, while the bus lane, in their view, had at least offered a controlled and predictable approach to this constraint, reducing lane switching and enhancing traffic predictability. Nevertheless, the full suspension of the bus lane went ahead as planned, and after being reinstated for a brief period during the Olympic Games in July and August 2012, it was finally removed, though post-removal analysis painted a mixed picture, as while congestion appeared to ease somewhat further upstream on the motorway, queuing re-emerged with familiar intensity at the Brentford narrowing point. Traffic data also showed a slight increase in nitrogen dioxide levels near the carriageway, particularly in residential areas, with this being attributed to heavier overall traffic flow and higher average speeds, now that vehicles were no longer confined to 2 lanes over the relevant stretch. While in environmental terms, the move was seen to represent a step backwards, particularly in light of the UK's legal obligations to reduce air pollution in urban areas. Overall, the M4 bus lane, despite being but a 3.5-mile stretch of redesignated motorway carriageway, proved to be a lightning rod for controversy and debate as to its effectiveness in reducing carbon emissions, congestion, and safety concerns upon one of the busiest stretches of motorway in Britain, with its short 11-year existence often being considered the face of the Blair government's inability to deliver comprehensive improvements to the UK's transport infrastructure in order to bring about meaningful improvements to environmental impact.